Welcome to Paranormal Matters, brought to you from Rainbow Light Studios. Freeing the mind from the prison of human perception. We hope that you'll join us to explore the science behind paranormal experience, fascinating topics related to multidimensional fields of consciousness, explaining psychic phenomena, healing, and spiritual awakening, drawing upon a rich archive of direct psychic and angelic experience and paranormal investigation. Hello everyone and welcome to the programme. Last week we were talking about geophysical links and paranormal phenomena, and as you know there's been a lot of interest in the paranormal linked to sites where people can pick up the energy of a place, and we're going to continue with that topic this week. And this week I'm delighted to welcome to the programme Carol Lamb, who many listeners will know because Carol has presented on Paranormal Matters for the past 2 years. And Carol experienced past life memory in childhood, and she's talked about those experiences before. And after several years in nursing, Carol took these past life memories and drew on them in her therapy work. And she pioneered past life therapy without hypnosis way back in the early 90s, and Carol's going to tell us a bit about that before we go on to the particular site that we're going to be talking about today. So welcome to the programme, Carol.
Hello, Jennifer.
Carol, can you tell us about your early work with past life memory, because it's going to link to the things we're going to be talking about today?
Yes, well, it came out of my own childhood experiences when I had several very distinct memories which were, although I didn't understand at the time what they were in fact memories of other lives, and they were very, very clear and unusual in the sense of I was connected very directly to them. So these weren't vague impressions or memories in that way. I could actually feel the clothing. It was exactly like being there. And although I didn't understand what they were about, I never forgot them. And much later in my life I came to understand what the purpose of those memories were, and in fact that was to become the focus of my life's work, and to connect with other people.
I was going to say, because didn't you then met with a group of people who actually shared those lives?
I did. I came out of nursing and went into therapy work, and as you were just saying, I was using quite a unique approach really, where we didn't use hypnosis. It's just a meditative state.
Yes.
And through that I started to teach seminars following the therapy programme, and I met a group of people. I was introduced to a group of people who knew nothing about past life work at all. They just had a general interest in the paranormal, and to cut a long story short, the people began to remember the same lives that I had memories of as a child, and that was the beginning of my research work really, which has lasted for 25 years, and the whole work has been documented. And that was the first group of people who through them I came to understand what a soul group is.
Yes.
So not only that we can have and do have memory of other lives, other times and places, but that we actually meet with the same people again and again, and for many reasons. And so that first group of people I worked with for about 3 years, And then as I progressed with my therapy work and the teaching, I met a larger group of people, and the same things started to happen. So we again began to experience that people had experience of the same life. Not always, but often. And they were sharing the same stories without knowing. So without knowing at all what the what the other person was doing. And so the stories were correlating is what I'm saying, really. And that was the beginning of the work that eventually led to the teaching programme, the academy, clinics, centres and so on.
Before we go on to talk about consciousness in more detail, could you just say something about the Living Memory Trust?
Yes, the Living Memory Trust that was formed several years ago to actually put the documentation together in a way that would hopefully provide some evidence to show the continuity of the soul. And we're hoping to publish this work in the near future because of course there's the general interest, the general public have an interest in all things paranormal, I think.
Yes.
It's part of being human. We want to understand unusual and strange happenings, and I think most people have had something happen to them in their life that they didn't understand, or certainly they know of someone who has. So we were sitting really on a great archive of experience here, and we decided that it deserved to be documented in a way which would hopefully reach people who are looking at it from a very serious perspective of research.
Yes.
And wanting to look at the continuity of the soul. I should just say that we're not just talking here about what people are often referred to as karma and the continuity in the sense of we live a life, we pass, and we come back again into another life. It's much more than that. It's about the soul personality, the individual soul personality, actually retaining the connections from life to life, and so that there is a purpose to each individual life, in the sense that they bring with them the past.
Yes.
So and they bring that past with them in the form of imprinted memory. So those memory imprints are encoded, if you like, in the very cells of the body and in the consciousness, which is multidimensional, so whether it's linked to the sensory body, the feeling body, that's the body that we're using when we go to sites, for example, and we actually feel something happening. Or it may be at the cognitive level where we recognise something, so we recognise a person or a place, or we see and re-experience something from the past.
Yeah.
This is because the memory is carried forward in the electromagnetic field of each person. And that electromagnetic field, of course, applies to all things. So not just to people.
Yeah.
So to sites, to bricks and mortar, to buildings, to the earth itself. Everything is made up of the same atoms and molecules. Once we break everything
Yes.
down, and this is of course what quantum physics is talking about now, that there is something occurring at the level of atoms and particles. It's a particle field which is resonating, vibrating, negatively, positively, and we respond to that vibration. So there's a vibrational frequency that we are actually carrying in our field.
Yeah.
And if that resonates with a site, this is what we find. This is when events can occur, or something may be seen or felt or experienced, which we refer to as paranormal.
Yeah. How does this view of an individual consciousness differ from the Hindu tradition?
It is different. Obviously there are similarities. You might say that the core principle that we live more than one life is the same. The difference, I would say, is that if we're on a wheel of life experience in the physical world, so we're just living a series of lives, but they're not connected one to the other.
Yes.
So the belief, for example, that we're born into a life, and although there will be a connection to our previous experiences, it's not the same soul personality.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
Or even, many people believe that we're born into many different life streams. So we could return as an animal, for example. I personally don't believe that. That's not my belief. I do believe that there are streams of consciousness, and that we follow through our own stream of consciousness. In very unusual circumstances, I think we can regress back into another stream, but that's not really what we're talking about.
No.
In this view, it's that the soul is connected from life to life, and although it may not, and usually does not, remember the previous life or lives, that's so that it can get on with the life at hand, but it does carry the connection forward. And the difference is that means there's a personal responsibility.
Yeah.
So that we are governed by the atoms and the molecules, the makeup that we bring to life, because they're based in our past experience and our choices. So these may be good or not so good. So there's a residual imprint from the past. Anything that's unfinished, the life that we come into provides an opportunity for unfinished business to be completed. Now that may be positive. That may be, for example, to further a particular aspect of learning. You may be a musician who's had many lives, refining, that skill and ability. And this is a life where you might reach the pinnacle of that, using that gift. But also it could be that the residual imprints, unresolved imprints from the past, things that do need to be resolved, are also brought into the life, so that we have an opportunity. It's really healing.
Yes.
It's for the purpose of healing the energy imprints which we all carry. And so we will meet the same people, the same souls from the past. And of course, many people will say that they've had that experience, that they've met someone and there's a recognition. They feel that they know the person even immediately on meeting, because there's an affinity. Or there's a dislike, an instant dislike, for no reason whatsoever. And that's what's happening. So the particles are vibrating and they're talking to us, and it's either something that we resonate with or we feel an aversion. Where there's an aversion, it's something to be healed.
So you believe that the soul personality, it's you forever?
Yes.
And it it continues?
And it's not continuing in the sense of an endless wheel.
No.
A cycle that goes on for eternity. I personally don't believe that, and my experience has shown that not to be the case. It's a refinement of the soul consciousness, so that through the lives we're learning how to live in a better way, how to resolve differences,
Yeah.
and we're progressing. So it's an evolutionary process, and we are able to live at a more refined level in energetic terms, which in the end means that we no longer are required to return to the earth and live in this vibrational field.
Yeah.
We can actually live at a higher frequency.
Yeah. So we carry this baggage or these imprints forward from life to life.
Yeah.
And which can be triggered
Yes.
In location and with different people.
And most certainly by places.
Yes.
Yeah, by visiting a certain place.
So Carol, maybe you can tell us, you've told us how it works, some of the experiences that you had during a training programme.
This was in the 90s, and we were at the point in our programme where we had established healing centres and teaching programmes and so on. Clinics, and we wanted to establish a residential program, and I found, in fact I didn't find, it was shown to me that there was a location which would be the place where we would work in the future, and in fact we did find this place, and I set up the training program for residential weekends, and this was to be a prolonged program. And it was a group of people who by this time had come together in the spiritual community that we'd formed, training to be therapists or teachers or whatever, but we were like-minded people who were very interested in the journey of the soul. So the residential teaching program was one part of our work, and we went to this site and people were very excited. It was a new step for us, and it was a conference centre used by many people. People would arrive either the night before or in the morning, and we would start the day at 10. So if people were arriving in the morning, they would have very little time before the seminar started. So they would arrive, be shown to the room, room sharing, and have a few minutes to just look around the room, and then perhaps go down, meet together in reception, and we would start the day. And this is what had happened on this day. So I wouldn't have contact with the students at that point. I would be downstairs in the seminar room, and on this occasion we gathered together in the room. I started to present what I thought was going to be the programme for the day,
Yeah.
which was about the things we've just been mentioning, the continuity of consciousness, and some practical work of looking at memories as they arise. Now, as I was explaining this and starting the day, I noticed that a young woman sitting close by me was very restless and looked very disorientated, uncomfortable, and I was glancing across and wondering what was the matter with her, and I could clearly see she was in an altered state of consciousness. Something was happening to her, and so I asked her, did she want to use this experience to do some work, and she said she did, and she got into the therapy chair, and she immediately started to receive impressions, which were impressions of another time, another place, and she was describing being a little girl who was playing on the path outside a large house. And through this work over the years, I developed my clairvoyance, if you like. I could see the memories as they were forming for the person that I was working with, because you're actually seeing into the auric field. And I realised that it was the house, it was the site that we were actually teaching in, that she was describing. She went on to tell the story of this little girl who was looking for her mother, basically, and she kept going into the kitchens, and there were cooks and maids in the kitchens cooking and baking, and she was asking for her mum, and they were saying, or go outside and play. She kept being sent outside to play. And so this memory was sort of going around in circles, really. And I asked her, what's happening? Go to any time when this changes. Are you able to see your mother or not? And she described going into the house, going up the stairs very quietly because she wasn't supposed to be there.
Yes.
And she was going up and onto the landings and looking for her mother's room, and pushed the door and said, "It's very dark, I can't see." And then she could see candles, and then she could see a box in the room, and she was walking towards the room. Now, I can tell you that at this point, all the people in the room who were observing were leaning forward in the chair very quietly, thinking, what on earth is in this box?
Yes.
And she was walking towards the box, and then she suddenly jumped and said, my mother's in the box. She could see her mother's legs and then her mother's face, and it was that her mother had died, and the body had been laid out in the bedroom, and that was why she wasn't being allowed to go into the house. Now, at this point where she had this, it wasn't an impression, she could clearly see her mother, she began to weep. It was the partly shock and partly a release of emotional energy of having been looking for her mother and then finding her mother.
Yes.
As this was happening and I was bringing her out of the session, aligning her energy back to the present, a woman at the far end of the room, another student, began to call out in a distressed voice, my little girl, I want to say goodbye, what's going to happen to her?" And of course we were all completely taken aback.
Yes.
And this is the only time ever in a therapy session that I'd had two people actually present in the same room, connecting to the same story, and both actually going into an altered state of consciousness quite spontaneously. And at the end of this session, what we discovered was that these two people were actually mother and daughter today, in the present time. But they had both connected to a story in the past as mother and daughter, where the mother had been ill and unable to see her daughter. She had TB, and they were keeping the little girl away from the mother for obvious reasons. And she became very ill and, in fact, passed. The little girl was trying to see her mother, so the two of them were separated through the illness. How it works, when people say, how does this work? It's the healing that proves the story.
Yes.
In the present time, this mother and daughter both described feeling very disconnected from each other, feeling that there was a barrier between them, and each kind of blamed the other, felt the other was responsible for the barrier. So although they were quite close as mother and daughter, they couldn't actually connect together. After this story, that was gone, and they started to actually relate to each other in a much more positive way. And that is how it works.
Yes.
That there is an actual change, there's an exchange of energy in the process of remembering and the recognition, and the letting go. There has to be a letting go. It's not just about observing. There has to be a letting go. That's the alchemical change in the energy. And in this particular story, it was the sight that had ignited the memory.
Yes.
So the two of them had come along, both coming to the same seminar, but absolutely unaware of any of this story or any connection or anything. And it had just arisen perfectly, spontaneously. And the healing was for both, of course.
Yes.
And this actually had quite a twist to it, this story, because what I didn't know at the time, and I only found out later, was that the young woman who'd been in the chair and remembering the story of the little girl had actually had quite a, most definitely a paranormal experience on arrival at the house. As I say, I didn't know about this. She'd arrived at the house, gone up to her room with a roommate to drop her bags off and so on, and then come down to the seminar. And she'd looked around her room and laid on the bed, and glanced across at a wardrobe which had a mirror, which was parallel to the bed she was lying on. And as she glanced across at the mirror, she saw in the mirror feet and legs, but they weren't the reflection of her own feet and legs. It was of a dead body.
Oh my goodness.
And so she'd run out of the room, of course, quite distressed, quite hysterical from all accounts, saying, that these feet were dead, the legs were dead. And of course I didn't know anything about this. And she'd, we hadn't had time to discuss that, even if you wanted to.
So the memory was surfacing.
As soon as she walked
right.
to the house, as soon as she entered the house, over the grounds, of course. And this is how it works. So the site itself was carrying the memory, the imprint. It's sort of locked into the energy field. If the person who is connected to that memory walks across that site or enters the house or whatever, then there'll be a resonance within their field.
Yes.
So there's a correspondence to the two fields. And that can either, in this case, of course, this was quite extreme, I'm sure, partly because of the work we were doing and engaged in. And we were very aware and wanting to understand things. If someone doesn't understand or isn't interested, let's say, they may feel nauseous or they may have a headache.
Yes.
Or just feel generally, a bit uncoordinated.
Yes.
And then it will pass, of course, and they'll never know. They'll never know that they'd actually connected to something from the past. But of course there's no healing either.
No.
In that case.
Carol, what would you say to people who said that this is just imagination? People imagining these things.
Well, I think that would be an understandable reaction. I would say that if this was just imagination or people jumping on the bandwagon or something, there certainly would be no healing. And the stories that we documented, over many years, but certainly related to that site, were all connected to a healing. Now, a healing may be at the physical level, the emotional level, mental level, or even spiritual. As an example, as another example, one lady, as soon as she came onto the site, began to experience backache. She never had backache, and she was squirming around in the chair and, really could not get comfortable at all. And on the second day of the weekend, we decided to see if there were any memory connections to the pain. And she went to a story where she'd fallen down the stairs, again connected to that site, and that she'd fallen down the stairs and injured her back. After that, she didn't have backache again. So you would need to give another explanation for why a pain in the body can suddenly arise, that something that's never been there before, and that disappears after the memory has been, reconnected.
Oh, thank you, Carol. I love hearing your healing stories.
Well, there were many stories at that house. We worked there for 2 years, and the stories just kept coming.
Yeah.
So in many, many ways.
So hopefully you'll come back again and tell us some more of them.
Yeah, I'd love to, yeah.
And of course that was the beginning of the academy training, wasn't it?
Yeah, and people had thought that they were coming for the training to learn, theoretically almost, and certainly experientially and observing. But in fact, that's not the way it happened. We were actually shown, we were taught.
Yes.
It wasn't something that I put together and presented to people. It was that they presented to me.
So
they brought the stories to me.
Totally experiential.
Yeah.
And also just to say that if any listeners at home have had similar experiences, we'd love to hear about them, and you can post them in the Rainbow Light forum.
Yes.
And the links are on the show page. And if you want to know more about a background to this work, we've got lots of programmes in the Paranormal Matters archive. And I'm just going to give you a plug, Carol, because you're guesting on a radio programme, Soul Temple Radio, which is coming to us from Ottawa in Ontario, Canada. And you're a guest on that programme on Wednesday, September 2nd.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, so thank you for joining us, Carol, and
Thank you.
I hope that listeners at home have enjoyed this programme as much as I have. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
We hope you found the programme interesting and will join us again next week. Meanwhile, if you'd like to investigate further, you can go to the Paranormal Matters archive to explore a whole range of related subjects, or you can visit us in the Rainbow Light forum if you have any questions or comments. So we look forward to you joining us next week.